I gotta show you something in Photoshop called layer comps. Have you heard of these things called layer comps? We're gonna use them between Photoshop and InDesign. They're a little bit difficult for me to describe up front, but as the name would imply, we can save out different compositions, different layer compositions. For example, if I had a document that had 4 or 5 different layers, different text layers, and so on, and I'm not sure exactly how I want this final composition to look, I can save out multiple compositions, multiple copies almost, if you will. And then in my layout application, InDesign, I can choose between these different compositions, these different saved out comps. But it all happens inside a single Photoshop file. It's kind of weird. Let me show you how this works, and then hopefully it'll make more sense for you. I'm going to go and open up our next project file. Go ahead and double click on the gray background inside Photoshop. And inside your project files folder, head down to a file called window.jpg. Go ahead and pop this guy open. All right, so there's our file. And I know that I want to apply a duotone effect using a hue saturation adjustment layer. You've already seen this a couple of times, but I'm not sure what color I want to use. I'm not sure maybe what's going to go properly with the rest of my layout inside InDesign, or maybe I'm not quite clear, or maybe a slightly more real world example. Maybe the client doesn't know. Maybe they haven't decided, and I want to give them 2 or 3 different choices, right? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to set up 3 hue saturation duotone effects all inside the same file, and then we'll get all this out into InDesign. So what I'll do here inside the layers palette, there's my background layer, the windows. I'm going to head down to the adjustment layer menu, and of course head for hue saturation, and I'll go ahead and turn on this colorize option. And by the way, the only reason why I'm using this duotone hue saturation adjustment layer effect is just because it's a simple example that I can show you. Really what I want you to focus on is how layer comps work, how they function, and what I show you here, you can sort of extrapolate out into your own work, right? So I'm going with hue saturation here. I turn on colorize down at the bottom, and I get the sort of this reddish, kind of pinkish overlay, and I go, all right, well, that's not too bad. That's all right. I'm going to head back to the layers palette now, and I'm going to take my hue saturation adjustment layer, and I'm going to duplicate him simply by dragging him down to the new layer icon down at the bottom of the layers palette. I'll hide the original hue saturation. I now have the duplicate selected, and I'll head back to adjustments, and I go, all right, the pink overlay or the red overlay, that's not too bad, but I want to try maybe a yellowish or maybe into the greens. Let's try green. That looks kind of cool. All right, so we'll go with that. And then I'll go back to layers now. So now what I have is a green overlay and the pink overlay, right? Something like this. And of course, the original all the way down at the bottom. All right, and I go, all right, I'm going to do one more, maybe a blue. So I'm going to take the current hue saturation adjustment layer, and I'll go and duplicate him. So now there's going to be 3 hue saturation adjustment layers. I'll turn off this fella here. There's the most recent adjustment layer, back to the adjustments panel, and this time what I'll do is I'll drag my hue slider into the blues, maybe something like that. All right, so that's looking good to me. So now I have 3 different choices, I guess 4 different choices if you include the original there. So there's the red, and then the green, and then finally the blue, right? So now what I want to do is I want to save these different compositions out as layer comps, or I want to add them, if you will, to this file, because it's all going to be inside one file. And to do so, I'm going to use Photoshop's layer comps panel. So head up to the window menu and then look for layer comps about halfway down. And this is the fellow that we get here. Right now, inside the layers palette, I have the original layer turned on, the background layer, and I also have my blue hue saturation adjustment layer turned on. So what I'm going to do inside the layer comps panel is click on this guy here, create new layer comp. And inside the dialog box that appears, I'm given the option to give this guy a name. You don't have to, but maybe what I'll do is I'll call this guy blue. And what do I want to save here? Well, I want to save the visibility. If I wanted to, I could save the position of objects. Again, if I had maybe a collage or something, I want to save the position of different objects, and also any layer styles if I had applied layer styles to some of my different layers, which I didn't do here. And then what's kind of cool is you can also add in notes. The reason I laid this out this way was because the client asked for such and such, right? Something like that. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and click on OK. Now the blue layer comp gets added to the layer comps panel. That's great. I'm going to turn off the blue adjustment layer and I'll head down to the next guy, the green adjustment layer. And then what I'll do is I'll go back to the layer comps panel, create another new layer comp, and I'll simply call this guy green. And visibility is the only option that I have turned on here. And I'll do this one more time here with you for the last guy. So I'll turn this guy off, turn the last guy on. This is our red guy. I'll go back to layer comps and I'll create another layer comp called red. I'll go ahead and click on OK. All right, so there we go. Now that we have all of this set up inside the file, what do we do with it? Well, we have to save our file out as a Photoshop document, and then what we'll do is we'll get this guy into InDesign, and I'll show you how things play out there. So we'll do all of this in the next exercise.